when you are doing a sequel and you're part of the series, that you do want to give the audience, in a certain way, you want to give them the same kind of an experience. They expect to see aliens, and they expect to see the heroine and certain type of situations. So I do believe that you want to give that satisfaction. But at the same time, I do believe that your job is to invent something new and offer the audience something new, because otherwise you're just rehashing what people before you did. So,
following the success of Aliens, executives at 20th Century Fox were understandably enthused to churn out another sequel. After all, they had a hit on their hands. James Cameron took Ridley Scott's horror movie and turned it into an exciting action film with entertaining banter, product placement, and merchandising opportunities. He truly added that dollar sign to the property. But the people at Brandywine Productions, executive producers, and rights holders David Giler, Walter Hill, and Gordon Carroll were not as excited about the prospect of another sequel.
Well, Alien 3, everybody wanted to make the sequel to Alien, kind of except us. We weren't so, we were happy to do it, but we weren't all that enthused. Because we thought, what do you do with this one to make it different? The whole idea you can't do something that's just going to be a reheat of 1 or 2.
They wanted to take the series in a new direction, both to stay ahead of the audience and simply to explore new ideas and be creative. Today, all the Alien sequels are often perceived as basically doing the same thing as Alien. Even when Ridley Scott later took the franchise in a new direction with Prometheus and Alien Covenant, these movies couldn't avoid similarities to Alien. The final 20 minutes of Covenant are basically a sped-up remake of Alien slapped onto a completely different film. Alien Romulus was so blatant about it that it even copied lines of dialogue and brought back a legacy character. It's a regurgitated product. But back in the late 80s, the desire was still to do new things. Renny Harlin was attached to direct the upcoming film, and he, too, was enthusiastic about moving the franchise forward.
When I signed on to do Alien 3, my first principle was that I'm not going to copy Ridley Scott or Jim Cameron. They are fantastic filmmakers, and I felt that if I could bring something new into the series, then it was really worth doing. And it wasn't just a movie that is just a sequel, but it was really a movie on its own, taking all the great heritage from its predecessors.
Giler, Hill, and Carroll wanted to explore the duplicity of the Weyland-Yutani Corporation and their plans to use aliens for military technology. To this end, an ambitious 2-part sequel began development. Shot simultaneously, the two films would play around with Cold War metaphors and follow the surviving characters of aliens. Michael Bihn's Hicks would be the protagonist of Part 3, and Sigourney Weaver would step up for the 4th installment. In fall 1987, cyberpunk author William Gibson was approached to write the script for Alien 3 based on Giler's, Hill's, and Carroll's treatment, and to hurry up doing it before an impending writer's strike. In the story, the Sulaco drifts into space controlled by a faction called the Union of Progressive Peoples, or UPP. Soldiers of the UPP board the ship, take Bishop's remains, and get attacked by a facehugger. The Sulaco eventually docks at a friendly space station. Ripley is in a coma and doesn't figure into the plot, but Hicks discovers the company is doing alien experiments on the station. In the meantime, the UPP have repaired Bishop on their station and conduct alien experiments of their own. Eventually, both stations are overrun by aliens, and Bishop suggests the human factions must unite to face their common enemy. The film would end with sequel bait. Humans go off on a mission to the alien home planet, to be seen in Part 4, at which point Ripley would wake up from her coma and star in the film. However, the producers weren't happy with Gibson's work, and he eventually left the project. It was an intriguing idea for a sequel to Aliens. Not only would it have Cold War overtones, but Gibson even injected the story with metaphors about HIV. It seems like it's simultaneously a complete departure from the formula and a good continuation of the general action-oriented tone of Aliens. However, it would also be an expensive movie to make, not to mention how challenging the 4th one might become. but one sees echoes of its ideas in both Alien Resurrection and Scott's Prometheus and Covenant. Eric Red was the next screenwriter to tackle Alien 3. His version from 1989 would kill off all the survivors of aliens, including Ripley. Marines board the Sulaco and bring the ship, along with the inevitable alien eggs, to a domed space station that houses a sort of small-town farming community. Underneath this town, however, there's a secret lab where the company attaches facehuggers to farm animals to create hybrid aliens. Eventually, the aliens break out of the lab and fight it out with the farmers under the dome. This script was completely rejected by Brandywine Productions, though it did introduce the idea of aliens running amok in what would essentially be a regular Earth town. We would later barely see this in the very dimly lit Alien vs. Predator Requiem. The script also introduces an idea similar to the black goo from Prometheus. David Twohy was hired to continue developing the Gibson Script, this time as a standalone movie, since Brandywine gave up on the idea of making parts 3 and 4 simultaneously. The Cold War was over by now, and the script's original metaphors became outdated. Instead, Twohy came up with the idea of a prison ship where the company would be doing experiments on the inmates, creating different breeds of the alien. At this point, Renny Harlin became fed up with the constant rewrites and exited the project, feeling that the prison ship would be visually too similar to the previous settings.
I was afraid that there was just no way around the fact that we are going to end up in a similar kind of an environment with lots of corridors and lots of bulkheads and doorways and the kind of things that we've seen before.
Executives at Fox were lukewarm on not having Ripley in the film and persuaded Weaver to return, so Twohy had to write her back into the story. But right around this time, Vincent Ward was hired to direct, and he came up with a whole different story for Alien 3, which he would go on to develop with writer John Fasano. Twohy was angry that there was a parallel script being written without him and left the project. The version by Ward and Fasano turned out to be the most ambitious and novel of all the various iterations. Ward envisioned an archaic planet made entirely of wood, where a monastic order would live in seclusion. They would see Ripley's escape pod crashing onto the surface, and they would interpret this as a religious sign, but they would gradually start to view it as a trial by God, because Ripley's presence would bring along sexual temptation and gruesome deaths. They would refer to the alien as the beast and think that it's the devil. Ripley's attempt to fight the alien would be hampered by the monks and her declining health because of an alien inside of her. Eventually, she would sacrifice herself to kill the alien. The Fox people were not keen on killing off the character, but Weaver insisted on it. The film went into pre-production, and many designs were prepared to fulfill Ward's grand visions of the wooden planet and his gothic horror plans. However, there were doubts about how to film such an elaborate movie. Some also cited logical issues. Did a wooden planet even make sense? So despite being in pre-production, Ward began to receive notes and demands. He was to change the monks into prisoners and change the monastery on a wooden planet into a mining colony on a regular planet. Refusing to do so and encountering heavy interference from the studio, Ward exited the project. Unfortunately, Alien 3 already had a release date and work needed to progress quickly. Eventually, Walter Hill and David Giler reworked the Fasano script that was based on Ward's ideas, hiring Larry Ferguson to help them out as script doctor. And so the writing credits in the finished film reflect this final arrangement. At this point, the studio had hired young up-and-coming talent David Fincher to direct the film as his feature debut. He started filming without a finished script, but with a looming release date, the studio breathing down his neck, sets that were still under construction, and so on. The troubled production of Alien 3 is the stuff of legend. It was so bad that Fincher disowned the film, refused to work on a director's cut 10 years later, and actually still refuses to even discuss the film at all. The project was stuck in development hell for too long, and it was overdone by too many cooks. The final nail in the coffin was the edit, which whittled the film to under 2 hours, with characters and plot points suffering as a result. Alien 3 was released to theaters with many issues, and received a lukewarm welcome by both critics and audiences. In 2003, an alternate cut was released without Fincher's involvement, but based on his notes. The so-called assembly cut is the closest we'll likely ever get to his version of the movie, and it's a vast improvement over the theatrical cut. It changes, or rather restores, several key sequences, including the entire opening of the film right up to the birth of the xenomorph from a completely different animal. It also rectifies the treatment of Golek, who simply disappears out of the theatrical version because they cut out a major sequence which involved his death. But in the end, even the assembly cut couldn't fix one of the biggest grievances people have with Alien 3. It simply wasn't the story audiences wanted because it kills off Newton Hicks before the opening credits even finish. All the way back during the production of Aliens, James Cameron talked about continuing their story. His movie was an allegory for motherhood, and it ended with a lovey-dovey promise of Ripley, Newt, and Hicks forming a family unit. Instead of their future adventures, what we got in Alien 3 was an allegory for terminal illness, where Ripley watches Newt's autopsy, hangs out with born-again Christian rapists, and then kills herself. Alien 3 is not a fun 80s action film, but a nihilistic 90s nightmare. It's even more different from Aliens than Aliens is different from Alien. But this happens to be the reason why I personally love the film. I find it highly rewatchable, visually and thematically compelling, very well acted, atmospheric, and novel enough that it doesn't feel like a simple retread. To me, Alien 3 perfectly tackles the sequel dilemma that Renny Harlin opened this video with. In a sequel, you want to give the audience things they liked before and things they expect to see again. But you also want to do some new things so it's not the same movie all over again. There should be a balance between old and new, and somehow all those writers and executives who had all those different ideas for what Alien 3 should be all collectively achieved that goal. None of them are happy with the finished product, but all of them got what they wanted. There's Ripley fighting an alien in dark corridors, but the rest is unique and different. Even though Fincher himself will never ever admit this, Alien 3 is an amazing Fincher film with many of his hallmarks already present in his debut feature. And compared to the endless sequels, soft reboots, and spin-offs we get today, which play it safe and regurgitate the same things over and over again, Alien 3 feels daring and, dare I say it, original. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, please hit subscribe.